Hi, Rick.
Hey Sarah, how you doing?
Good, good. We are live now, and thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome. We appreciate your support, and we are now at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So we'll wait about a minute for some people to come on and enjoy the music. And today I'm going to show the banner quickly. So this is our banner for today. The title of our talk today is John McCain. All right. Okay, thank you and welcome everyone. Welcome to our history chat today. And I'm going to turn off the music. Welcome to the history chat for today. Thank you for joining us. And my name is Sarah M. I'm an author of the book How I Survived the Killing Fields, and I'm also an inspirational speaker. I'm happy to host this history chat today. And I'd like to go ahead and introduce our presenter. Our presenter today is the 10-time nonfiction book author and an authority on American history. His number one book is called They Made America Great. He spent most of his adult life living aboard boats and has traveled far and wide in the Americas. So let's welcome Rick. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you,
And
Sarah.
today's topic is John McCain. So the one-liner about John McCain is this: always the Maverick Vietnam War hero and mentor in the U.S. Senate. So today we are going to talk about someone who lived in a lifetime. He only passed away in August 2018 of brain cancer. No doubt in his life was shortened by 5.5 years of brutal POW, prisoner of war, captivity in North Vietnam. He has a he was a five-term U.S. Senate for Arizona. Unlike so many others in Washington, he always put what was best for our country ahead of partisan politics. So that's John McCain. Well, I'm looking forward to hear what Rick has to share with us about the life of this American, um, a wonderful person, John McCain. Share with us, Rick.
Okay, Sarah. John McCain said, I really learned to love my country when I found myself a prisoner in somebody else's. Boy, and I can relate to that a little bit. I spent some time in South America in some very rough places, and I, not one fraction what he did, but you appreciate America more when you're out of it. He was quite a character. He was born in the Panama Canal Zone in a naval family. His grandfather was an admiral in World War II, nicknamed Slew. He was part of one of Bull Halsey's task force in the Pacific, and he had a heart attack 4 days after the war was over and died. And he
Oh,
might have had one earlier at sea. His father was a submariner in World War II and also an admiral later on in Vietnam. And nonetheless, John McCain's path was not an easy one. He was a military brat. He attended 20 schools. And if anybody crossed him early on, he'd fight them. He'd pick a fight. And he didn't care if he won or lose. He just wanted to make sure, he just wanted to be to fight him. Uh, he went to high school at a boarding school in Washington D.C., St. Stephen's Episcopal School, and he wasn't a good athlete. He was about 5'9". He played football and he wrestled, but he was known for playing everything with intensity. And he sneaked out of St. Stephen's to Washington D.C. and get beer. And he has some unflattering nicknames at St. Stephen's and at the Naval Academy, including Worst Rat his freshman year, Punk, Nasty, McNasty. And when he got to the Naval Academy, he said, this is his own words, I embarked on a 4-year career of insubordination and rebellion. And his prospects for graduating from the Naval Academy did not look that good. Although he was a bit mischievous, his classmates kind of followed him as a leader. One of them said, going out with John McCain on Liberty was like being in a train wreck. If you can, I know what that means. Some people probably do too. Nonetheless, his admiral father was a bit disappointed in him. And he racked up 100 demerits, and he graduated fifth from the bottom in his 899. He graduated 899, so that was fifth in the bottom in 1958 class. Nevertheless, at the Naval Academy, he said, I learned honor and the importance of serving something greater than myself, and in the Navy's code of honor. And so he did learn something at the Naval Academy. As a matter of fact, he got buried at the Naval Academy. He's interned there next to his best friend. He finished at the bottom. His best friend, Larson, who finished number one, who was an admiral, and they're in state together down there overlooking the Severn River in Annapolis, Maryland. But when John McCain became a newly minute ensign, he didn't stop partying. He kept going on. He went to Pensacola for flight training, something his father or his grandfather never did. And so I thought that was interesting. And he was a bit of a cowboy. He pushed the envelope with his airplanes. And one time in a training accident in Corpus Christi, Texas, his plane went out, and he went out in a shallow bay and almost drowned. He came to just in time, able to pop out of the plane. But the next night he was out partying. Sounds like John McCain. In another crash near Norfolk, Virginia, his plane crashed into some trees, and he got out of it just in time. But over time, he was a good pilot. He eventually matured when he married his first wife, Carol. She already had 2 children, and he met her, and they had a third child, the daughter, I think, Sidney McCain, and so he matured some. In 1966, he sent to Vietnam, and then in July 1967, he'd already flown several missions. He was aboard the USS Forrestal, and I remember this as a child. This Forrestal had a horrible disaster where I think I don't know how many people were killed. I think 134 sailors were killed, and a loose rocket was on the deck, and it slammed into McCain's plane or another plane. We're not sure which one, and it just created a horrendous fireball. The whole deck was ablaze, and like I say, a lot of sailors were killed. It took 20 hours to put out the fire, and the Forrestal was out of commission for 2 years. And John McCain was lucky he survived. He was a little bit burned, but not too bad. And like I said, a lot of sailors didn't survive. And after that, he said, well, I'm looking for another carrier. In the Vietnam, in the South China Sea, and the Oriskany was kind of known as a snakebit carrier. It lost a lot of pilots, 1/3 of its pilots. And the pilots were nicknamed themselves the Saints, but John McCain jumped onto the Oriskany as a pilot. On his 23rd mission, 22 successful missions, he decided he was tasked to bomb a power plant in Hainan. He released his bombs near Hanoi, and he was able to evade at least one surface-to-air missile, Soviet-built SAMs, and the second one took his wing off, or later one took his wing off. I'm not sure if it was the second one. And he was going down, and so he ejected from the plane, and when he ejected, both his arms and his leg were broken by the seat of the rocket boosters for the parachute, and he was happy to see that he was going to land in a lake right in the middle of Hanoi because his parachute wasn't fully deployed. But he's wearing 50 pounds of gear, and he sank to the lake twice. And finally, with his teeth, he was able to pull his inflatable vest and surface. But that's just the beginning of his problems. Many people there in Vietnam saw him, and they were pounding on him. And they See, I think somebody broke his shoulder with a butt of a rifle, and he got another bayonet stuck in his leg, I think, or something like that. And he had two broken legs and two broken arms and one broken leg. And he was going to be a prisoner of war for a long time. He didn't know it, and he didn't look very good. And two people came and said, "Stop beating this guy. Send him to the Vietnamese prison, the Hanoi Hilton." And he was tortured there. He said, "Well, all he provided was his name, rank, and serial number." And his cellmates thought this guy's not going to live for a week because he's really bad, or his body was really bad. But they tried to take care of him, clean his wounds up, and then nourished him a bit. And he did live for the week. And then the North Vietnamese learned that this was the Lieutenant Commander John McCain, the son of the Admiral John McCain, orchestrating the war off Vietnam. And they thought, oh boy, this is going to be a great propaganda tool. So we said, well, why don't you, we'll let you out early if you confess to your black crimes against the Vietnamese people. Of course, John McCain refuses. Will only be released if everybody who's before me goes out, ahead of me, and I'll do that. And he had an offer for release, and he said, no, he wouldn't do it. So they beat the heck out of him even more. He would not confess, and they were pounding him. He lost his teeth, and he got many broken ribs, and for a time they were really trying to pound info out of him. He said the offensive line, when he was named his squadron, he named the offensive line of the Green Bay Packers. But it was so bad, and he said, if the Vietnamese are going to try, I'm going to kill myself before the North Vietnamese do. And he tried to hang himself in a cell, but a guard saw the shirt he was trying to hang through the window and stopped him. But he still got pounded on after that. He would never confess to the crimes against the Vietnamese people. He was beaten and tortured to an inch of his life, and he said he prayed more fervently than he ever did any time in his life. Eventually, and he did 2 years of solitary confinement. Eventually, he was returned to the company of other POWs, and there were 662 of them were in there. And by 1973, there was a brokered agreement. I think Henry Kissinger was involved to release the prisoners, a lot of prisoners. But his body was badly broken. He walked with a limp, and he could never raise his hands above his head to comb even his hair. He was a mess. And like you say, his teeth were gone. And he stayed in the Navy, though, until 1981 and reached the Navy rank of captain. One of his last assignments before retiring was a liaison to the U.S. Senate. And he got a taste of politics there. And he also met his second wife, Cindy Hensley from Arizona, and they would have 3 children together. After he retired from the Navy, he settled in Arizona. He said, you know what, I like politics. I like Washington. I'm going to run for. And he was a Republican, and he had not lived in Arizona very long. And one of his persons he's racing in Congress in Arizona said, boy, you're a real carpetbagger. You come down here and you want to run for Congress right away. And he said, listen, pal, as a Navy brat and a naval officer, the longest place I ever lived was in the Hanoi Hilton. That shut him up. And John McCain did win that race. And then he started a family in Arizona, and he ran successfully for 2 terms in Congress. And when he first arrived in Congress in January 1983, his hero was Ronald Reagan, who was the president at the time. That was a great guy. But Ronald Reagan wanted to basically send troops to Lebanon, late 82 and 83. And John McCain is a new congressman. And the Maverick he was, the Maverick he always would be, said, I don't think that's a good idea. The American people don't support it. You're sending a peacekeeping troop to Beirut, Lebanon. Not a good idea. But he was overrun, and Reagan had the way. And before long, the Marine barracks was hit by a suicide bomber, and 240 men were killed. And he believed we should never send people into war unless the American people were behind it. And he was elected in 1984. And then in 1986, an icon of the Republican Party, Barry Goldwater from Arizona, was retiring, and there was an open seat. So he ran for that. And he clashed a couple of times with Reagan on the Iran-Contra affair, which Reagan got in hot water. McCain thought that Reagan was kind of screwing up and shouldn't do that. And, let's come clean with the American people. And he irritated some people in his own Republican Party by doing that. But so he had this reputation of doing, not always not being a partisan, always going with the people that got him in. And then in 1989, he got in a bit of trouble. There was a savings and loan scandal. A guy named Charles Keating, I remember it well, and 5 senators were embroiled in it to different degrees. Keating was basically trying to get the senators to basically not pass some legislation, to let him do more with the savings and loan. And he got ensnared in that. And him and another senator, John Glenn of Ohio, were basically clear, but they said, you guys are pretty stupid for believing that. The other 3 senators, I won't mention them, they didn't get elected. They're no longer in the Senate. And he learned a lesson from that. In the coming years, 7 years, he would try to reform Senate finance campaigning with a fellow from across the aisle named Russ Feingold. So, and he bucked the Republican hierarchy. He was not for tax cuts for the rich. He acknowledged that we should acknowledge climate change, and he did from then on campaign for finance reform. And when Clinton was president, he sometimes wanted to use force, and sometimes he didn't. And sometimes John McCain was with Clinton, sometimes he wasn't. And this angered men in the Republican Party who said they should be against Clinton for everything. And McCain was not like that. He did what was right. He did not bend with the winds. And this is really, really interesting. In 1982, after Clinton was president, he got together with Senator John Kerry, and they wanted there was a board to see if there's any prisoners left behind in Vietnam. And he was wary of Kerry. They're both Vietnam veterans. Kerry was a Democrat from Massachusetts. McCain was a Republican. But after a while, they met and they talked, and McCain thought they could see eye to eye, and they did it. So they went on a mission to see if there's any report. I'm sure they had many hundreds of people working for them to see if there's anybody left in Vietnam. And it turns out there wasn't, but some people were. That's what the report said, and some people were very unhappy with that. They wanted to basically, make it a big issue. McCain said it really wasn't an issue, and so did Kerry, and they both agreed. And not long after that, the two of them got together again. So let's normalize relations with Vietnam. This is in, I think, 1990s. They said it's time to, and McCain said to Clinton, I'm tired of looking back in anger. It's time to put the past behind us and do what's right for both countries. We're talking about 300 million people in the United States and Vietnam. And here's the guy who was so badly tortured an inch from his life, and he's willing to forgive or try to move forward his country as well as Vietnam. Now, I would listen to him before I listen to other people. And a lot of Republicans said, no, we can't do that. And he antagonized many people doing that, but it was the right thing to do. And now we have a trade status with Vietnam, and both countries are benefiting in a trade wise. And then as I said earlier, he thought campaign finance reform was important because he himself got kind of in trouble with that with Keating. And he reached across the aisle in 1995 to a guy named Russ Feingold, a Democratic senator, I think from Minnesota. And they tried to do campaign finance reform. And it took them 7 years. And they got you could Google the McCain-Feingold campaign reform bill, and it did pass, but it was attacked mercilessly from both sides. And he was a giant in international affairs. And this is what he said: to refuse the obligation of international leadership for the sake of some half-baked nationalism cooked up by big people who would rather find scapegoats to solve problems is unpatriotic. And I agree with that. I worked in that field for a while, and I think international affairs, we are part of that for a while. We just can't ignore it. Here's another thing that was big, and he kind of went against the grain. After 9/11, when we got attacked by certain elements within the Muslim world, George Bush believed in, when we went to war with them in Afghanistan, he believed in capturing the prisoners. Mostly his vice president, Cheney, did. And torturing these people in Guantanamo Bay. And McCain said, no, we don't torture people in this country. It goes against our national, what we are. And he went against that, and he thought it would come back to haunt us. And He did not. He spoke out against Bush is things to do that as a Republican. He was always the Maverick, and he always did right and what he thought was right. Most of the time, it was right, and tried to get the truth of the matter. In the Senate, his best friends were some Democrats, Joe Lieberman, and he mentored many senators, including like Amy Klobuchar, and many young senators. They look highly of him. Klobuchar said he was a unifying presence in Washington. He put his country first, and as someone who loved his country out in a way that a lot of people cannot even imagine. He was friends with Lindsey Graham for a while in this Republican Party, but I read a book about this stick not that long ago, and it's very unflattering. As soon as McCain was dying of brain cancer, Lindsey Graham basically abandoned him, for other things. But that's another story. But I did read that. I think it's a good source too. Uh, and he thought there was too much rancor in politics. And I didn't appreciate him, Trump calling him a loser after he flew 22 successful missions in Vietnam. I was mad as heck about that. Uh, and he also didn't like Donald Trump's view of immigration either. He was on a border state, Arizona, and he thought the way Trump speaks about them is appalling, as though welfare and terrorism are the only reason they could have here for coming to our country. And being from a border state who knew the issue fairly well on the border, he thought that was terrible. Well, that's he got both sides of the aisle didn't like him for he didn't play partisan politics, and I think it was the right way to be. He ran for president twice. In 2000, he ran against W. Bush in the primary, and he said, "I owe more to America than she ever owes me." I go, "My God, how can a guy like who's been through all that say such a thing?" But he had the Straight Talk Express, traveled across the country, and he was a straight shooter, straight talker. And but he didn't. Bush he was almost out of money before his campaign began, and also Bush had the white evangelicals on his side. And I don't know how the hell that makes any sense because Bush wheeled out of Vietnam, going to the Air National Guard, and here's a guy that uh, did what he did, and in Vietnam it was really really tough. And in the second election against President Obama, he won the primary, and he said some lady came up to him at one of the rallies and said, "I can't trust Obama. I've read about him, and he's an Arab." McCain, knowing better, took the mic from her and said, "No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, a citizen that just happened to have disagreements with on fundamental issues. He's not an Arab. I admire Senator Obama and his accomplishments. I want everybody to be respectful and make sure that we are." Now, where has that gone today? Where has that gone today? Obama was a celebrity. It was hard to beat. And when McCain lost to Obama in the general election, he gave one of the best conciliatory speeches ever. Uh, and he got along with Obama afterward. On August 2018, McCain died of brain cancer, shortened, I'm sure, by 5.5 years in Vietnam. And he always was the Maverick, always willing to break from tradition. He cared about our military. He cared about our political campaigns. He cared about our free traditions. He mourned the loss of bipartisanship. Most of all, John McCain cared about our country. And he wanted to be, and when upon his death, he wanted to be buried next to his old Naval Academy buddy, who was an admiral at the top of his class. And I remember, I'll say this word for word, I'm about to close up here, that his daughter, his oldest daughter, by Cindy McCain, gave part of a eulogy, and I'll read a little bit of it here, and I'll end with it, and I'll just read about 6 lines. "We gather here to mourn the passing of American greatness, not cheap rhetoric from men who will never come near the sacrifice he gave so willingly. He knew pain and suffering with an intimacy and immediacy that most of us are blessed never to have endured. Yet he survived, endured, and triumphed. Somewhere in the great beyond where warriors go, there are 2 animals meeting their much-loved son, telling him they're the greatest among them." That's why I love John McCain. Anyway, ready for some questions, Sarah? Or anybody has one from the audience? I can't hear.
We have one comment from the audience. I posted right there.
Okay.
Um, my question for you is this. As someone who endured unspeakable torture in Vietnam, John McCain went against the grain and two presidents in his own party, Bush and Trump, who wanted to torture POW for information. So tell us more about that.
Well, he understood torture more than anybody. I mean, 5.5 years of it. He was a young
Mm-hmm.
man when he started. It was awful when he ended. And he thought that was a sell out to America's best traditions doing that. Plus, he was the one that pushed for Vietnamese rapprochement, reconciliations 20 some odd years later. So he thought that was really wrong. That, America does not do torture. He would say that. And that's what made America great, better. And he didn't like those two presidents for that reason. A lot. Okay, there's a lot to that, but you can. That's a basic answer.
Okay. As a U.S. Senator, how did John McCain evolve?
Oh, he did. He got in trouble early on, 2 or 3 years in this, probably 2 years in the Senate, with Charles Keating and four other senators. That he did. This is a reason. This is an argument for not term limits. I'm ambivalent on that because he learned something from that and went on to push uh, McCain Feingold to clean up some of the Senate finance. So he made some mistakes early on, and he learned from them. He tried to do some good things after that. So he learned from that, and he grew in the Senate. And he was a giant, even though he's only 5'9" in the Senate, especially on international affairs and Senate finance.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. And what can we glean from John McCain's life?
He was always a maverick, always a maverick. And I think we need more mavericks. And somebody says, take care of your mavericks. I've heard this somewhere because they're the ones who are going to bail you out when times get tough, including your country or whatever. And when you have all this partisan on one side, partisan on the other side, no mavericks, you want people who are mavericks. They're healthy. They're healthy for the economy. They're healthy for the country. They're healthy for the party. And he was a maverick. And take care of your mavericks. I think that's the one thing I would say about that.
Okay. And I have the picture of John McCain shaking hand with President Nixon. So let me show. This is John McCain's picture with President Nixon, and this picture um, is what is said in the courtesy of National Archive.
Yeah, it came from National Archives.
Yeah.
That's in 1973. He is in his dress whites months after he's been back here. And he said basically that I never learned to love my country so much when I was a prisoner in somebody else's. And he was, I don't know, he's probably promoted to commander by then in the Navy.
Yeah. Very nice. Love to learn about the life of somebody like that. It's you did great. Thank you so much. And let's wait to see if we have any question from our audience. Audience, please post your question. We have a few more minutes. We are happy to take your question. Don't see it.
I read 4 books on him.
Yeah.
A couple more. So I do know my stuff on him, and I'm happy. I think I can answer a lot of questions. I try to keep this to 25 minutes, but I could go on for an hour and 15, hour and a half.
All right. Well, if no question, we will say goodbye and let's see what else could we show. Okay, one last show about the of our banner, so you can see contact information for Rick and for myself. rickroad.com is Rick's website, and mine is sarahim.com. And my book is available on my website, sarahim.com/book. Thank you so much for watching, for supporting us, and give Rick a encouragement that he will continue to read and to share more stories. With that, I would say goodbye and appreciate you watching and come back in 2 weeks.
Great.
Yep. Bye now.
Bye bye.
Oh.